All right, so we all know that every good story starts with once upon a time, right? Once upon a time. And I think the reason why Once Upon a Time is so compelling and so it sort of calls to people is because it makes us think that there was a time that was better, right? And I think at this point in our country's history, I think that there are some folks out there who think that there was a time when there was something better. And I've been asking myself this question in the past couple weeks in the midst of the violence and everything that our country has been facing. Better for who, right? Better for who? Better for people who look like me? So when I think about Once Upon a Time and I think about telling stories, I don't think that our country has ever been great for some people. I think that for people like me, maybe, but I think until we all recognize that Black Lives Matter, I don't think that we can say once upon a time, I don't think we can say that our country was great and we want to go back to that greatness.
When I think of the word free, I think of the privilege I have to freely walk down the street and not worry about the repercussions if I have an encounter with a police officer. That's my light-skinned privilege. I also think of the freedom that I have to be here with all of you tonight and share a story that means a lot to me, but that is also a free evening here with the love of my life and with a bunch of friends to tell stories. So we wanted to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter is not a hashtag for us, it's a value. And we're not here to preach to you, but we are here to share a story with you about the importance of our values and how that's played out in our marriage.
So there we were sitting in a booth at a tiny diner in New Hampshire. A steaming hot plate of pancakes had just arrived to the table.
I like pancakes a lot.
She does, yes. And my sunny side up eggs were cooked to perfection. And see, we were just about to be married in a few months, and we were giddy with excitement. But just as much as we were excited, we were also a little bit nervous about the daunting process ahead of us of planning this gargantuan beast of a wedding. And so for anybody who's ever been through that process of planning a wedding, you know that copious amounts of comfort food are necessary to sustain you through that process.
Exactly. So that's why on this particular mid-March morning, Kyle and I decided to treat ourselves to a breakfast out to eat, and that's how we found ourselves at this diner. So we were sitting, our food had arrived, and of course I had brought with me my 3-inch thick binder of wedding to-dos. I'm a planner. I really like to-do lists.
Is that the only 3-inch binder full of to-dos that you have, my love?
So I have a few binders. But that's a whole nother story. So there we are with our 3-inch binder, with our pancakes and our eggs. And as I flip through the binder, the next task on our wedding list of to-dos is to talk about last names. And this was a particularly momentous conversation for Kyle and I because we both have a lot of feelings about names.
Yeah, last names are kind of a big deal to us.
Yeah, so for me, in my life, names are important because I'm adopted. See, I was born in Korea, and gosh, when I was about 4 months old, the name I was given was taken away from me. When I was born in Korea, I was given the name Ae-san Han. Now, there's some uncertainty as to who exactly gave me this name, if it was a biological parent, if it was a hospital worker, or someone at the orphanage. But whomever named me, I had the name Ae-san Han for the first 4 months of my life. And then when I was adopted and came to the States, my parents did what was common practice of the time, and they chose a new name for me, an American English name, and they named me Aeriel.
Like The Little Mermaid?
You know that's a sensitive subject. You know how I feel about that, and you know that I look better in seashells.
That's true. That's
okay.
true. That's true.
So,
yeah.
We don't even need to start that. I digress. So, they named me Aeriel, and they decided to spell it with A-E at the very beginning of my name because A San Han, the beginning of that was AE in my Korean name, and it meant love, and they wanted to include it in my English American name. Yes, it was very sweet. And I did. I grew up in a wonderful, loving family, and I had a great experience growing up, but there was always something that didn't quite fit. So I was adopted into a family of Andersons. And in the great state of Minnesota, which is my home state, there are lots of Andersons and Johnsons and Pearsons and Svensons. And I really did grow up on lutefisk and lefse and Sven and Oli jokes. That was my reality.
Yeah, sure. You betcha. Oh,
yeah, sure. It was a real thing. But what was interesting is that I was a conundrum to other people. I was not the Anderson they were expecting. This was not the Anderson they were expecting. I remember one time in particular, I had applied for a job. I was there waiting in a waiting room to have an interview. The interviewer comes out holding a resume and says, is Aeriel Anderson here? And I'm like, oh, that's me. I'm really excited to be here. And the expressions that ran across this person's face was like, what? Oh shit. Hey, I'm so glad to meet you. And this was not a singular occurrence, okay? For me, this happened all the time. And it was othering. And it was painful to consistently not measure up, to not meet people's expectations.
And just to be clear, growing up with the last name Carpenter in Michigan, this was not ever something that happened to me, right? I looked exactly like what people expected a carpenter to look like.
So for me, names have been kind of a tough thing, right? There's been some pain, there's been some challenge. And so when I was younger and I would imagine, if and when I ever got married, that opportunity to be able to choose my own last name, to have authorship and ownership over how I would be called and known to the rest of the world, that seemed really freeing. That seemed like something that was going to be really important. So that's why names have always been important to me.
And names are important to me because I'm a feminist. Now, I know maybe for some of you out there that might sound weird for me as a guy to say that I'm a feminist, but I should maybe just ask why it sounds weird. And also, I'll acknowledge that I came to that understanding through my mom. See, I believe that women are strong and powerful and courageous.
Because we are.
As well as loving and caring and kind.
We are also that too.
And I believe that men are limited to a rigid set of emotions and expressions that not only harm us, but harm tons of people around us. And like I said, I came to that understanding through my mom. So my parents got divorced when I was younger, and all throughout the divorce and afterwards, my mom, she never missed a beat in raising me and my two brothers. She left a cushy administrative job to work nights at a factory. And then when that wasn't enough to make ends meet, she started cleaning houses during the day and on weekends just to make sure that my brothers and I could have everything that we wanted, including, by the way, a fresh new pair of Airwalks and Jinko jeans on the first day of 8th grade. Yeah.
Too bad I missed that one.
That's fashion right there, folks. And working that factory job, my mom actually ended up getting carpal tunnel in both of her hands, making tiny motors with tiny parts, and it crippled her hands for the rest of her life. And so I grew up in awe of this amazing, inspiring woman who, she sacrificed so much for me and for my brothers. And then as I graduated high school, went on to college, and eventually on to grad school, I learned about the horrors of sexism, and I learned about the ways in which our culture and our society has been constructed to view women as second-class citizens. And when I compared that to the vision of my mom, this strong and powerful woman, it just didn't add up, just didn't match up. And so...
when you met me.
Yes, that's right. That's right, when I met you. When I met Aeriel, at this point I had dedicated my life to educating folks about these gender inequities and specifically talking to men about what we can do to change that, to try and make that better. And so when I met Aeriel, there was never any question that we were not going to go down that traditional route of her taking my last name. And don't get me wrong, there are so many good reasons to go down that traditional route and to make that decision. And I absolutely support that. But for Aeriel and I, that just was not going to be the right decision for us. It wasn't going to fit our values.
Okay, so flashback to the diner in New Hampshire. At this point, we have consumed all the pancakes and the eggs.
Food coma, absolutely.
Definitely in food coma. But we are still faced with this difficult question of our last names. And I cannot get this image out of my mind of some hypothetical future child of ours as like a 5-year-old, brow furrowed, his little hand like cramping up as he's trying to fill in a bubble sheet with the hyphenated last name Anderson Carpenter. That is 18 characters and far too much work for any small child.
I'm pretty sure they don't make bubble sheets that long. It's just, it doesn't.
So we were resolved. We were going to do better by our hypothetical unborn child of the future and not...
Hypothetical, still unborn child, just to be clear.
Right. So we decided we need to come up with something else. So we flipped over the placemat. At this point, it was sticky with Vermont maple syrup and leftovers from the sriracha that we'd used on our eggs and everything else. But we needed a creative writing space because we knew that we were going to have to really work to come up with something that matched our values.
And just for the record, stickiness is likely one of Aeriel's least favorite things in the whole world.
This is true. So you know how some people don't like spiders and they have like a phobia and that has a name, it's called arachnophobia. I feel that way about being sticky.
It's serious, like real.
I also really, really don't like ambiguity in my life. You remember the 3-inch thick binder of to-do lists, right? So in that moment, when we were sitting at that table in that diner with the placemat, not only was I sticky, I was also sitting in this moment of ambiguity as we were trying to figure out what to do moving forward with our last names.
So as we looked at the placemat and started brainstorming different options, we decided to take our former last names and do a mashup. And so we started scribbling down all the different possibilities, and all of those different possibilities were just ugly. They were just really, really bad. So we had Carpterson.
Carp.
Anderter.
Just real awkward.
Just
real
really
awkward.
bad, all conjuring up images of fish and the ugliest kind of fish that you can imagine. And so, as we kind of exhausted the list of different possibilities of combining our former last names, we decided that was also not going to be an option. That was not going to work for us. We scrapped it. That was off the table. And so we were left kind of feeling a little bit lost. What do we do? And we eventually turned to our middle names. And so for me, my middle name was Lee, L-E-E. And that was an important name for me because it was a name that was passed down through the men in my family. So it was my middle name, it was my dad's middle name, and it was his dad's middle name. So Lee came to be an important name in my family.
And my former middle name was Ashlee, A-S-H-L-E-Y. And that was of significance because I mentioned I was adopted, and my given Korean name initials were A-S-H. So my very thoughtful parents decided to put those initials in my middle name of my English American name, and they chose Ashlee. So we had these two names, and it just kind of seemed really clear. We would put them together. A-S-H.
L-E-E.
Ashlee. And I have to say, it sounded a lot nicer than Carp. So I felt optimistic. I could see like the brow of my hypothetical unborn child in the future starting to relax as, he was hopefully going to inherit, or she, sure, was going to hopefully, or they, was hopefully going to inherit a name that they could be proud of.
And it was also congruent with our values, which was really important.
Exactly. So a lot of people would think, okay, they decided on the last name, that's probably the end of the story. But it's not for us. There's one other part that we need to share with you. So you know how Kyle talked about how his mom was really influential in his life, how she was such an inspiration and a role model and really taught him what it meant to be a feminist? His mom also had a lot of feelings about our decision to change our last name.
Yeah. So the one person who wasn't super thrilled about the idea of us changing our last names was, you guessed it, my
Mama
mom.
Carpenter.
Yep, absolutely. So the part of the story that I left out when I had mentioned that my folks got divorced was that when that divorce happened, my mom kept her husband, my dad's last name. And she did that so that she could have the same last name as me and my brothers. And as much as it pained her to think about signing his last name for the rest of her life, it pained her even more to think about going into a parent-teacher conference or to the doctor's office and be asked whether or not she was our real mom. And so when I told her that we were changing our last name, that I was changing my last name because of my values, that didn't really go over so well. So leading up to the wedding, weeks beforehand, my mom and I had blowout fights over the phone. She just could not understand. She even threatened not to come to the wedding. In the end, she decided to come. And on the morning of the wedding, we decided to clear the air and go for a walk around the church grounds. And we were both a mess, just in tears. It was a highly emotional day for lots of different reasons, but especially because of the tension that had been built up around this name change decision. And my mom turned to me with tears in her eyes, and she said, "Kyle, it feels like I'm losing my baby boy. It feels like you're betraying me and the whole family." Yeah, that is never something you want to hear your mom say, ever. But I sat with that, and I turned to her and I said, "Mom, I love you. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm just as much a part of the family now as I ever have been. And this name change is not gonna make a difference. It's not gonna change that." And the issue was never really resolved. It kind of stayed that way. And even still to this day, she addresses our mail just Aeriel and Kyle, no last name.
So like on envelopes, it really says like to Aeriel and Kyle, our street address, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45220. And all I can think is how much the post person is probably like, what the heck is what? There's something going on.
Who are these people?
Right. But this is our family now.
Yeah. But as much as it was a challenge and a struggle to have that conversation with my mom, and honestly with other folks who don't really understand, even just today, we were at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, which in Ohio it's called the BMV, not the DMV. We were there today getting our Ohio State driver's license because we've been here for a year now, and so I guess it's about time that we get our Ohio State driver's license. Even then, when we were talking about, have you had a name change, all the questions were directed to Aeriel and none of them to me, because the assumption is that Aeriel has made the name change and not me. So as much as the decision has been challenging, not only for my mom and other people, it's been really important because it's a way for us to communicate our values. It's a way for us to communicate what we believe in and what's really important to us.
So for us, when we were thinking about this prompt and what it means to be free is to live our values. And that doesn't always come easy. Freedom isn't always easy. Like Kyle shared with the story with his mom, sometimes there's resistance even from the ones that you love.
Sometimes it's sticky.
There's that too. And that doesn't mean it's not worth going for. We knew that our values were important and we wanted to start our marriage reflective of those values. So we created a new married last name. And we also knew that the 25 years of our lives before we met each other was important as well. And so we wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, there's lots of tradition and meaning behind those names that we had. So we didn't want to just leave those behind.
So while we created a new married last name, we also decided to keep our family names as our new middle names.
So now I'm Kyle Carpenter Ashlee.
And I'm Aeriel Anderson Ashlee.
Thanks.
Thank you.